"You're not invited." That's all it said. No greeting, no punctuation, just 3 words and a text from my own son. Sent at 7:42 p.m. the night before his wedding. Read it in my kitchen, holding the card I had picked out weeks ago. I had even written a little note inside telling him how proud I was, how I'd always be there. I hadn't mailed it yet. I was planning to bring it with me, with the gift. The gold chain that had belonged to his grandfather. I had just taken it to be. Polished that morning. Still warm from the box when I opened the message. I'm Margaret Ellison, 73 years old. And that was the moment I knew I was no longer considered part of my own family. Subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. The silence in my house was deafening after that. I didn't cry, sat down slowly, folded the card shut, and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't call him. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there, staring at the curtains I had sewn myself. Years ago, when this home still felt like a place for love, I remember thinking, so this is how it happens. Not with a fight, not even with a slammed door. It's just a message, cold and plain, like a receipt, or an invoice. Or a warning. He used to write me letters in crayon. You're the best mom ever. I found one last week in a box while looking for my winter gloves. It had a sticker of a rocket ship and some glitter that still fell out when I opened it. I should have known, but the drift started slowly. Visits cut short, calls returned after days. Then the tone, the one that said I was too much, too old, too slow, too emotional. I used to bake his birthday cakes from scratch. He stopped liking sweets, he said. His wife thought it was healthier. The last time I saw them, she told me the wedding was going to be small. Just a few friends. Quiet garden ceremony. Nothing fancy. I nodded. I remember noticing she didn't meet my eyes. I offered to help. With decorations. She said the planner had it handled. That was 3 months ago. I hadn't been asked to try on a dress. No one called to check dates or send an invitation. I waited. I waited the way mothers do, believing they'll remember. That something must have gotten lost. But nothing got lost. I did, and the thing is, I had already bought the dress. It's a pale gray with lilac trim. It's a kind that doesn't scream for attention, just rests quietly. Like me, I had it hanging by the door, covered in a plastic sleeve. I kept brushing past it, waiting for the moment I'd slip it on, stand in the back, smile through the tears, and let him go into his new life with blessings. That's all I wanted to be there. Even if only as a shadow in the background. Instead, I was left holding a chain and a card. My name removed from the table before it was even set. I didn't answer the text. What could I say that wouldn't break me? That night, I made tea and sat in the chair by the window. I didn't sleep. I watched the neighbor's porch light blink, off and on as the hours passed. I thought of the times I had rocked him in my arms, his fever burning through the cotton of his pajamas. I thought of the times I went without so he could have new shoes, or the exact art supplies he liked, or the trip to the science museum in 6th grade. He had cried when we left, said it was the best day of his life, and now this dot, there is a pain. That comes when you're erased. It isn't loud, it's not even sharp. It's like a quiet, aching fog that moves through your bones. You forget what you were doing before it arrived. You lose your appetite, not for food, but for being. You shrink in corners and hope no one sees you, because to be seen is to be remembered, and remembering hurts. But I didn't stay in that fog for long. Something inside me clicked, not like a light, not like hope, more like a lock. Something closed, and something opened. Not in him, not in them. In me. That was the night I stopped asking to be loved the way I had loved, and that was the beginning. I wasn't always this quiet. There was a time I filled the room, not with noise, but with effort, with warmth, with the kind of presence that makes holidays happen and keeps cupboards stocked and beds turned down just right. I used to hum when I cooked, talk to myself when folding laundry. I laughed easily. My husband used to say I made our house feel like something soft you could sit inside. Even when things were hard between us. Even when his voice turned sharp or his silences lasted days. I still tried to keep the edges smooth. I thought that if I loved well enough, long enough, deeply enough, it would be noticed. I'd see it, that my son would grow up surrounded by it, shaped by it, that it would matter. I don't think it mattered in the way I hoped. His name is Daniel. He was born on a Thursday. He had a tuft of dark hair that stood straight up like a flame. He was so quiet in the hospital, I kept checking to make sure he was breathing. The nurse told me, some babies just take in the world before they cry. Remember thinking, maybe he'll be a poet. He wasn't a poet. He liked puzzles. He liked things with exact edges and right answers. He asked 1,000 questions. I never got tired of them. I took him to the library every week. Let him fill. A bag of books that sagged under the weight of wonder. He loved bedtime stories. Even when he could read on his own, he'd still hand me the book and say, just read it your way. Your way is better. That boy is not the man who sent me that message. Or maybe he is. Maybe it was me who held the idea of him too tightly, too. Lovingly, too long past its truth. I never remarried after his father died. It wasn't a tragic love story, just a long, tired one. There were good years and cold years. Years where we were strangers passing toast. Years where we laughed unexpectedly in the car. When he passed, I sat in the pew alone, listening to people say he was a devoted husband. He wasn't, but I let them say it. What good does correcting the story do when it's already been framed and hung? Daniel was 23 then. Came back for the funeral, but didn't stay long. He said he had work. Kate, I told him to take the tools his father left in the shed. He said he didn't need them. Kate asked if he wanted the old records or the cufflinks. He shook his head. He barely touched the house, like he was already halfway gone. That was the first time I noticed the distance. After that, the calls became shorter. Then came the excuses. Meetings, deadlines, trips. Eventually, he stopped answering altogether unless I left a message that sounded urgent. Even then, his replies came like echoes. Short, measured, polite. The first time I met her, his wife, I had baked an apple tart. She didn't eat sugar. I poured her tea. She let it go cold. I asked about her family. She talked about herself instead. Daniel watched her like someone, afraid to blink. I knew then, though I didn't want to. I knew I wasn't going to fit. Still, I tried. I sent birthday cards with handwritten letters. I knitted a blanket for their first apartment. I offered to help when they moved houses, though they never accepted. I asked if she'd like any of the china from my mother. She said she preferred everything new, modern, minimal. I became something. They tolerated like a power outage. It's inconvenient but expected now and then. I learned to read their silences. It's the way Daniel would scroll his phone when I spoke. It's the way she would clear plates before I finished eating. No one said anything cruel, not directly. But indifference is its own language. It's cold and fluent. One Thanksgiving, they arrived late and left early. She didn't take off her coat. Daniel brought store-bought dessert in a plastic tray. I had set the table with the good silver, lit candles, even warmed the plates. He barely looked at them after they left. I stood in the doorway for a long time, holding the dish towel like it might explain something. I didn't cry. But my knees ached in a way they hadn't before. It wasn't age. It was something else. Like I had knelt for years in a room that never saw me kneeling. But I still didn't stop. I kept inviting them, kept making room, kept telling myself that love requires patience. That one day they'd see. They never did. And the truth is, somewhere in all those years of trying to be enough, I disappeared a little. My world got smaller. I stopped going out at night. I stopped seeing old friends. I said no to invitations, so I could stay available for the family that never showed up. I didn't notice how quiet my house had become, how long the afternoons were. It wasn't one big betrayal. It was a series of small absences. Missed birthdays, forgotten calls. Leftover food for two. And then, finally, that text. You're not invited. Not, we wish you weren't coming. Not, we're keeping it small. Shh, excluded. As if I didn't exist. I once read that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's being unseen. That night, after the text, I sat and remembered all of this. Not with rage, just with clarity. Like the fog had lifted and I could finally see what had always been there. I wasn't sad anymore. I was awake, and in that stillness I felt something move in me, like a cord snapping or a door unlatching. After too many years shut, if I no longer belonged to them, then maybe I could belong to myself again. And that was a beginning I hadn't expected. I didn't sleep the night after the message. I just sat there as if the silence might teach me something if I listened long enough. By morning, the house didn't feel like mine. Not in the way it once had. I looked around the kitchen and saw 100 little acts of love that had been wasted. The hand-sewn placemats no one noticed. The spice rack alphabetized for dishes I never got to serve. The calendar still showing. The date of a dinner that never happened. I touched each thing lightly, like saying goodbye without drawing attention. I didn't cry. I made tea. Then I walked to the drawer where I kept all the old paperwork. Birth certificates, property documents, deeds, bank statements, wills. I had always been the one who kept track of things. My husband had left all of it to me, not out of trust, but out of habit. He wasn't a man who thought much about endings. I sat at the table and opened everything that was a strange kind of clarity. Like someone had wiped the fog off a mirror. And I was finally seeing myself not as a mother, not as a wife, but as a person. Just me, not a role, not a task. Just a woman who had given and now had nothing left to prove. I found the original copy of my will. It hadn't been updated in over 6 years. Daniel was listed as the sole beneficiary. There were small allocations to charity, of course, and to an old friend of mine who'd passed last winter. But the bulk of it, the house, the accounts, everything I had built was going to him. I'd written it back when I still believed in the bond between mother and child as something unbreakable. That morning, I held the document in my hands and felt nothing, no anger, no sentiment. Just a quiet decision forming at the base of my spine. I slid the paper aside and picked up the phone. Called a lawyer I had only met once at a community center meeting. Her voice was calm, efficient. I told her I needed to update my documents. She asked when I'd like to come in. I said, today. When I arrived, I brought a notebook with me, the one where I'd written down all the little things over the years, passwords, dates, notes to myself. I had always been careful with details. People underestimate how powerful a well-kept ledger can be. It holds your life in ink. It cannot be debated. She asked me if I wanted to remove my son from the will completely. I said yes. She looked at me gently, the way women do when they know you've had to come through something to get to that chair. We worked in silence for a while. When it was done, I walked out with new copies in my bag. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. There is a difference. Revenge is hot and wild. What I felt was cool and rooted. Like I had planted something under the surface that no one could see, but that would grow in time. I went home and made a simple dinner. Just enough for one. I didn't set the table. I ate by the window. That night I started gathering things. Not out of anger. Just preparation. I packed away the photos, the family albums, the Christmas ornaments I used to hang for no one. I wrapped the heirlooms in soft cloth and placed them in storage boxes. I wasn't throwing anything away. I was simply putting them where they could no longer hurt me. I sat on the bed and opened my laptop, signed into my bank account, changed the password, then my email, then my utilities. I made a list of every account Daniel had once had access to, directly or indirectly, and I severed every thread. I wasn't punishing him. I was untethering myself. I made another appointment. It's time with a realtor. She came by the following week and walked through the house like it was a showroom. I watched her face as she praised the light, the layout, the charm. She didn't know the walls held decades of silence, of small heartbreaks, the meals cooked and never eaten. She asked why I was selling. I told her I was ready for something smaller, something new. She smiled like she understood. Maybe she did. We listed the house, and just like that, I began to disappear from their world. No message sent, no confrontation, just quiet deletion. One button at a time. I took the wedding card out of the drawer and tore it once. Cleaned down the middle, not with rage, just with finality. The gold chain I had polished, I placed it in a donation envelope. There's a center in town that helps families rebuild. Maybe it will be passed to someone who remembers the hands that gave it. I've kept one thing, a small photograph of Daniel as a child. He's standing in the backyard with a plastic shovel, grinning at the camera with all his baby teeth. I don't know who he became, but I remember who he was. And that's mine to keep. Not his wedding, not his wife. Not his silence, but that smile, that boy, that memory. And from that place, not bitterness, but a quiet knowing. I began the process of leaving for real, not just legally, not just financially, emotionally. For the first time in my life, I was making decisions that had nothing to do with being someone else's anything. I was just a woman with a suitcase, a plan, and her name returned fully to herself. I didn't leave. In a rush, there were no slammed doors, no loud exits. Just quiet mornings, small tasks, one drawer at a time. I found the suitcase I hadn't used in years. Still smelled faintly of lavender from an old sachet tucked into the lining. I opened it and ran my hand along the inside, like greeting a part of myself I had forgotten. Packing wasn't hard. When no one wants you around, you learn to live light. I chose only what I needed. A few soft shirts, comfortable shoes, my notebook, the photo, the documents, one mug I liked, and a sweater I had knitted years ago that no one ever complimented, but always kept me warm. The rest I left behind. I didn't tell anyone I was going. There was no one to tell. My phone buzzed a few times that week. Promotions. A call from a clinic reminding me of an appointment I no longer needed. Nothing from Daniel. Nothing from her. I had given my realtor a date. June 3rd. I wanted the house. Empty by then. On June 1st, I took one last walk through the garden. The roses had bloomed early. I clipped one, held it to my nose, smelled of summers I used to fill with homemade lemonade, wet towels drying on the line, and a boy who ran, barefoot chasing bees. I didn't cry, but I stood there for a while. Then I locked the front door behind me and placed the keys in a small envelope marked, "It's the new beginnings." I checked into a motel 2 towns over. Nothing fancy, but clean, quiet, the kind of place where no one asks questions, where you can become just a woman with a book and a bag and no one to explain yourself to. That night, I sat at the small desk by the window and wrote down everything I remembered from the day. Not in grief, just as a witness. It's a rose. The porch light. The sound the door made when it shut. The way the silence followed me into the car but didn't sit quite as heavy anymore. I slept, and for the first time in months, I didn't dream of being left behind. The next morning I made a plan. I walked to the library and applied for a new card. I found a corner near the window where I could sit for hours without interruption. I began sketching out what the rest of my days might look like. Not in broad strokes, just the little things. A room with a view, a garden I could tend. A kitchen meant for one, where I could cook what I liked without worrying about anyone else's tastes or silences. Maybe a small book club. A bus route. A place where the clerk at the grocery store might eventually learn my name. I wasn't dreaming of a new life. I was shaping one, slowly, carefully, with the pieces I had left. At the motel I kept to myself. I cleaned my own room, tipped the woman who left fresh towels, sat on the steps in the evenings, and watched the sun slip behind the roof of the gas station across the street. It wasn't beautiful, but it was mine. I began writing letters I never sent. To Daniel. To his wife. To the girl I used to be before all this. I wasn't looking for closure. I was creating space, naming the wounds. Without reopening them, in one letter I wrote, "You chose your silence. I chose my freedom. We're both allowed to live with the results," and I folded it up and placed it at the bottom of my bag. I made a call to the lawyer to confirm the deed transfer had gone through. She said it had. The house was no longer mine. I thanked her and hung up, looked around the motel room, the yellow walls, the plain curtain, the hum of the old fridge in the corner, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. No one knew where I was. No one was expecting anything from me. I didn't have to wear the face of someone who was still trying. I could just be. And being, it turned out, was enough. I found a small rental on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. A studio with a narrow balcony, and a tree just outside the window. The landlord was a kind woman with laugh lines and keys on a ring shaped like a cat. She didn't ask why I was moving. She just handed me the paperwork and said, "If you want it, it's yours." I wanted it. The first thing I did when I moved in was make tea and sit on the floor. I didn't bring much, but I brought peace. I ordered a small table from a local shop. Nothing grand. Just something to eat on, write on, exist around. I bought 2 chairs, though I only needed one, not out of hope, just to leave room for the unknown. I unpacked slowly, one drawer at a time, just like I had left. I opened the window that night and listened. No television blaring, no footsteps overhead, just the breeze, just me. And I realized then that I didn't feel lonely. I felt whole. I had not disappeared. I had simply changed direction, and no one needed to understand it but me. I didn't expect them to notice right away. People like Daniel and his wife. They don't tend to look behind them. They move forward with the ease of those convinced the ground will always stay solid beneath their feet. But I had pulled something from that ground quietly without warning, and it was only a matter of time before they felt the shift. It started with a voicemail. I saw the missed call first. No name, just a number I still remembered by heart. The message was short, its voice clipped and hesitant. "Just calling to check in. Hope you're okay. Call when you get this." He didn't say Mom, not once. I didn't answer. I listened once, then again, and then I deleted it. There's a difference between concern and control. He hadn't called out of love. He called because something felt different. Because somewhere in his mind, a file he had long left untouched had begun to flicker. Maybe the bank wouldn't verify him anymore. Maybe the realtor's sign had gone up too fast. Maybe he finally noticed the silence where my voice used to be. I received a second message. 2 days later, longer, more confused. We drove by the house. There's a sign up. "I didn't know you were thinking of selling. Can we talk?" I played that one too. Once. Just once. Then I turned my phone off for the rest of the day. That week, I moved through my new space like a woman learning the shape of her own skin again. I found a small market that sold fresh strawberries. I spoke with the woman behind the counter. She had gentle hands and asked if I needed help carrying my bag. I told her no, but thank you. She smiled. That was all. At home. I ate my berries slowly, let them stain my fingers. I hadn't eaten like that in years, without hurry. Without sharing, not another message came 3 days later. "I'm just confused. Why didn't you say anything? Are you okay?" Still no Mom. No warmth. I could hear the panic starting to show through the cracks in his voice. The realization that something had slipped beyond his reach. I made a folder on my desk called Unsent Answers. I typed out a response, not to send, just to say it for myself. I didn't say anything because I was done being talked over. I didn't explain because you never asked me anything real. You didn't notice when I was disappearing by inches. You only noticed when the ground under you changed. I closed the document, saved it, and returned to my tea. One morning, I got a letter in the post, handwritten from her. His wife. She had never written me before, not once. I recognized the handwriting from gift tags and cold thank you cards. The letter was 3 pages long. It was careful, almost too careful, as if she was trying to sound soft without surrendering control. She wrote that they had been planning a smaller ceremony, that she was sorry for any confusion, that they'd hope to celebrate later in a more inclusive way. She said they'd noticed the will had changed, that the house was gone, that they were concerned I might have done something drastic. She ended with a line that sat in my chest like a stone. Family is complicated, but we all make mistakes. Maybe it's time we talk. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer. Not because it mattered, but because it no longer had the power to undo me. That night, I made a list in my notebook. It's a simple one. What I've taken back: my name, my time, my voice, my money, my peace, and underneath, I wrote what I owe no one. An explanation. I received another call the next day. His voice this time was more urgent. Not angry yet, but bruised, like someone who had touched a wall they didn't expect to be so cold. "Mom, just call me back, please. What's going on?" That mom landed late, like a name remembered only when it's needed. I did not return the call. Instead, I walked to the post office and mailed a check, a large one, to a charity for women rebuilding their lives after emotional and financial abandonment. I had researched them carefully. I included a note that simply said, this was going to go to someone who forgot how to care. I'd rather it go to someone who remembers how to begin. I walked out of the post office feeling lighter than I had in years. Not because I had given anything away, but because I had finally chosen where it went. Later that evening, I turned my phone back on. 2 new messages, one from Daniel, one from a number I didn't know. I deleted both without listening. It was no longer my job to be found. They had lost something. Yes, but so had one, and only one of us had been grieving it for years. Now it was their turn to understand absence, to live with silence and wonder where it came from. I no longer needed to explain mine. That was the power in leaving quietly. It echoed longer than screaming ever could, and was finally learning the sound of my own echo. They started unraveling the week after I made the donation. It began with a string of missed calls, some from Daniel, some from unknown numbers. Then came the texts, short, then longer, then frantic. Did you move? We need to talk. Where are you? What's going on? Can we come by? They didn't have my new address. I had made sure of that. Everything official had been rerouted through the lawyer's office. The house was gone, the keys handed off, and the bank no longer recognized Daniel as having any access to anything, not even to ask a question. I hadn't just stepped away. I had erased the trail behind me. The texts kept coming. They stopped being polite. You could have told us. Why would you do this? This isn't like you. You're being unfair. We're family. That last one made me sit down. I read it 3 times. We're family. Funny how the word gets pulled out only when there's something to gain from it. It hadn't been said when I was left off the guest list. When I stood alone in the kitchen reading that message, heart shrinking around its 3 plain words, I hadn't been family. Then just furniture, expected to stay in place, useful only when needed. But now that the house was sold, now that the will had been changed, now that the chain of entitlement had been cut, suddenly I mattered again. I turned the phone over and placed it on the table, screen down. I wasn't interested in their panic. I had lived in their absence far too long to be moved by their noise now. I did something I hadn't done in years. I baked not because anyone was coming over, not to impress or please, just because I used to love the feeling of butter softening between my fingers, the smell of something rising in the oven. I made a lemon loaf, simple, sweet, 1 slice at a time, just for me, while it baked. I sat at the little table by the window and wrote again in my notebook. Let them feel the space I used to fill. Let them sit in the quiet I once softened. Them taste the absence they taught me to live with. The calls stopped after a few more days. Or maybe I just stopped noticing. Either way, the silence that followed wasn't painful. It was clean. I imagined them sitting at their dining table wondering how this happened, asking each other when they had last called me, thanked me, noticed me, wondering how the inheritance disappeared, wondering why the house was sold without a word. Maybe they'd blame each other. Or maybe, like always, they'd blame me. Let them. People who erase you never think you'll erase them back. They think your love is endless, that your presence is a default setting, that you'll stay no matter how many times they close the door a little harder behind them. But I didn't stay. Not this time. And once you stop apologizing for being forgotten, you begin to remember yourself in the truest way. I started waking up before the sun, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I liked the early light on the curtain, the sound of the birds unsure and sleepy, the smell of the world beginning again. I bought a plant, a small fern in a green pot. I named her Quiet. She sat on the windowsill like she belonged there. One afternoon, I took the long bus into town, walked by the bookstore I used to visit with Daniel when he was young. I stood outside watching children pull their parents inside, eyes wide. No one recognized me. I liked it that way. I wasn't a mother or an old woman or a forgotten guest. I was just a woman with time. I went inside, bought a small book of poetry, something I hadn't done in years. The woman at the counter smiled, said she liked my scarf. I smiled back, said thank you. That was all, and it was enough. Later that night, I got one last text. A final attempt. If this is about the wedding, I'm sorry. We were under pressure. Things got out of hand. Let's talk, no signature. But I knew it was from Daniel. It came. At 10:14 p.m. I was sitting in bed, feet wrapped in a warm blanket, a soft jazz station playing low in the background. The lemon loaf had cooled on the counter. I'd had a slice with tea and lit a candle for no reason except the pleasure of it. I read the message once. Then I deleted it because it wasn't about the wedding. It wasn't about one text. It was about years. Years of being spoken over, set aside, treated like something permanent and disposable all at once. If he had asked me how I was, truly asked, at any point in the past 10 years, I might have answered. If he had knocked on my door without needing anything, I might have let him in. If he had seen me before, I vanished. We might still be something to each other, but he didn't, and I have learned. Finally, that forgiveness does not require return. Some bridges aren't burned. They're simply crossed and never walked back again. That night, I turned off my phone for good, not in anger, but in peace. I didn't expect peace to feel so quiet. It's not a parade. It's not a sunrise breaking open the sky. It's a slow hush settling over everything you once thought you had to hold on to. A kind of stillness that doesn't ask for anything in return. I'd spent decades waiting to be seen. Now, I was learning to see myself. I walked to the corner cafe one morning and ordered a coffee just the way I liked it. No substitutions, no compromises. The barista was young, soft-spoken, with chipped blue nail polish and a tattoo of a paper crane behind her ear. She smiled when I came in. I think she liked that I always left a tip in coins, neatly counted. After a week, she asked my name. Margaret, I said. She wrote it on the cup, then handed it over like it was something sacred. I took my coffee to the bench outside, sat with a cup between my hands. Watched people walk by with bags and errands and loud phone calls. No one looked at me, and for once, I didn't mind. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was simply separate. Later that day, I stopped by the community notice board outside the grocery store. Flyers for piano lessons, lost cats, a local knitting circle. I took one of the tear-off slips. That Friday, I walked into a room filled with women and wool and low conversation. I sat quietly at first, just listened. They didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. One of them, Joan, had silver hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and softened anyway. She passed me a ball of yarn and said, "You can just start with a square." That's how all of it begins, and so I did. My fingers remembered. At the end of the hour, I had a small patch crooked and loose at the corners. But mine. Joan looked at it and nodded, said, "That's how it begins, too." I walked home lighter. The next day, I rearranged the little apartment, moved the chair to the window, hung the old scarf over the lamp to soften the light, framed a leaf I had pressed. Inside my notebook, golden brown veined like memory. I pinned it above the desk. I made soup that night. Enough for two. I didn't know why. Maybe because a part of me still believed someone might show up. Not from the past, but from the world I was quietly joining again. I left the extra bowl in the fridge. The next morning, the woman from across the hall knocked on my door. She was carrying a laundry basket and looked tired in the way young mothers often do. Her baby was fussing, and she asked if I knew how to reset the dryer. I didn't, but I offered her a glass of water while she waited for maintenance. She looked around my small space and smiled. "It smells like lemon in here," she said. I told her about the loaf, that I'd made too much. She looked surprised when I offered a piece, as if no one had offered her anything in a long time. We sat for a few minutes, not long, but it was enough. She told me her name was Natalie, that she was 26, that her husband worked long hours, that sometimes she just needed another adult to talk to. I told her I understood that night. I pulled the extra chair a little closer to the table. Peace, I've learned, doesn't always look like solitude. Sometimes it looks like soft connection, a hallway smile, a shared slice of bread, a cup with your name on it. I stopped thinking about Daniel every day. It wasn't a decision. It just happened. Like the way a bruise fades without asking your permission. I didn't check my voicemail anymore. Didn't wonder if he was still trying. Maybe he was. Maybe he wasn't. I had stopped making him the center of my orbit. I could breathe again. One afternoon, I walked to the park at the end of my street. I brought my knitting, sat on a shaded bench, and watched two boys kick a ball back and forth. Their mother sat nearby reading. One of the boys fell, not badly, just enough to scrape his knee. The mother looked up, her voice calm, her face kind. "You're okay," she said. "Come here." He ran to her without hesitation. I closed my eyes for a moment. Let that feeling pass through me, the ache of what I used to be, what I gave, what was never held with care. Then I opened them again and kept stitching. Joan once said that knitting is like survival. You pull something loose and shapeless into. Order one loop at a time. You make something strong, something warm, something whole. And that's what I was doing now. No longer waiting for someone to notice. No, it's longer asking to be chosen. Just living. One quiet loop at a time. It had been almost 3 months when the letter came. No return address. Just my name, carefully written in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. I knew who it was from before I even opened it. There are certain shapes memory never forgets, the slant of a name, the way the ink pools slightly at the end of a word. I sat at the table and turned the envelope over in my hands. I didn't rush. I made tea first. I sliced a piece of the almond cake I'd baked the night before. I let the letter rest beside me, untouched, while the water boiled. I wasn't afraid of what was inside, but I wanted to meet it on my own terms. When I finally opened it, the paper crackled like something old coming undone. It was from Daniel. The first line was short, almost childlike. "I miss you." I read it once. Then again, he wrote about the wedding. How strange it felt without me there. How they kept looking toward the back, expecting to see me. How her mother sat in the front row and kept asking if I was coming. How he had lied and said I wasn't feeling well. He wrote about how he had found the house empty. How he didn't understand until he tried calling the bank. Until the lawyer answered. Until he stood in the driveway and realized he didn't know where I had gone, only that I had taken something. With me, he hadn't noticed was missing until then. He didn't apologize. Not exactly. The word sorry didn't appear once. Oh, there were other words. I didn't see it. You did everything for me. I thought you'd always be there. I didn't think I needed to check on you. I guess I did. He ended with a question. Would you be willing to talk? I folded the letter slowly, smoothed the crease with my palm, and slid it back into the envelope. Then I poured another cup of tea and stared out the window for a long time. I wasn't angry. That had passed. I wasn't even sad, not really. What I felt was something quieter, a kind of tired recognition, like someone who's heard their name called after years of silence, only to realize they no longer respond to it the same way. He had found his way to reflection, maybe even to regret. But it had come after everything else had been taken off the table. After the locks were changed and the doors shut and the lights dimmed. I wasn't the same woman who had waited by the phone for birthdays or invitations, or breadcrumbs of affection. I had gone hungry too long to be drawn back by scraps. Still, I didn't throw the letter away. I placed it in my notebook near the back, behind my list of things I'd taken back, behind the poetry clippings I'd started saving, behind the note I'd written to myself on the night I left, not as a sign of reconciliation, but as a record, proof that something had shifted. That silence had sent an echo back, but I didn't respond. Instead, I walked down to the local market, picked out some wildflowers, white with little yellow centers. I placed them in a jar on the windowsill just under the soft light that poured in every morning like forgiveness I'd given myself. Later that week, Joan invited me for tea at her place, a small flat above the library. She had 3 cats, all named after composers. The place smelled like old books and cinnamon. She poured 2 cups and handed me one without fuss. We didn't talk much, we didn't need to. We sat with the comfort of women who had both outlived versions of themselves no one ever mourned. At one point she asked, "Do you miss him?" I paused, thought about the question, not just the answer. "I miss the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest," I said. "I miss the letters in crayon, the questions about stars. But that version of him hasn't lived in a long time." Joan nodded, like she understood. "Sometimes people die before they stop breathing," she said. I left with a warm slice of banana bread, wrapped in parchment. When I got home, I sat at my desk and opened my notebook again, not to write to Daniel, but to write to myself. He asked to talk, and I am allowed to say no, not out of spite, but out of truth. I built peace in the quiet, and I will not trade it for noise again. A few days later, I saw Natalie in the hallway. She looked tired, hair messy, baby on one hip. She smiled when she saw me. "You want to come over for a bit?" I nodded. Her apartment was small, chaotic in a gentle way. Toys on the floor, dishes in the sink, laughter from a cartoon playing too loudly. She handed me the baby while she made tea. He reached for my necklace, gripped my finger. I held him like I used to hold Daniel. But this time I didn't feel the ache of loss. I felt something else. Presence. Natalie said, "He never sleeps this easily with anyone. You must have a calming energy." I smiled. Maybe I've just had enough storms. That night I sat by my window again, watching the city settle into its evening hum. The envelope from Daniel still rested in my notebook untouched. It didn't call to me. I had already answered with my absence, with my silence, with the life I had built beyond him. Peace doesn't arrive all at once. It moves in slowly, sits beside you without asking for space, makes itself known not by grand declarations, but by absence of pain, of weight, of the sharp things you used to carry without even noticing. That was how I lived now. Without sharp things, the days passed gently. I planted herbs in small ceramic pots on the balcony. Basil, mint, a little thyme. I watered them at dawn and watched them stretch toward the light, delicate and certain. Sometimes Natalie would knock on my door with her son on her hip. Sometimes I'd knock on hers with a fresh loaf or a story to share. We never spoke of the past, not hers, not mine, just the moment in front of us. The baby smiling, the tea steeping, the sound of two women remembering they were still allowed to be needed but not used. I had stopped expecting a second letter. That first one was enough to remind me what I already knew. Guilt does not guarantee change, and recognition is not the same as repair. Daniel never followed up. I don't know if he thought his work was done by sending a few soft sentences. Maybe he expected me to call, to pick up where we left OFAs if nothing had happened. As if years of silence could be swept under the rug with a memory of a wedding he knew I was never welcome at. But I never called. I never wrote back. Scott, I never explained. I had given too many explanations in my life, each one costing more than the last. I was done paying one morning. While rearranging the shelf above my desk, I came across the photo again. The one I kept. Daniel, age 5, standing in the garden with a plastic shovel and a grin as wide as the world. He looked like he believed in everything, in me, in magic. In days that never ended, I stared at it for a long time. Then I tucked it back into the drawer, carefully, reverently, not with grief, but with a kind of final grace. I would always love the child he was. But I had made peace with the man he became. Later that week, I walked down to the water's edge. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums instead of echoes. A small dock stretched out over the lake. I sat at the end of it with my feet just above the surface. The notebook was in my bag. Not for writing, just for holding. I reached into the side pocket and pulled out the letter. His letter. Still folded. Still intact. I held it in my lap. The sky was the color of forgiveness. Pale blue with soft clouds moving slowly, like they weren't in a rush anymore. I unfolded the letter, read it one last time. The words didn't land the same anymore. They weren't knives now, just paper. I placed the letter on the dock beside me. Then I tore it once, down the middle, then again. I didn't throw it into the lake. I didn't need to make a spectacle of letting go. I just placed the pieces back into my bag, tucked them beneath a folded scarf, and zipped it shut. It was done. Not because he had changed, but because I had. I sat there for a long time, watching a single bird skim the surface of the water, wings wide, casting a shadow that disappeared before it reached the shore. When I finally stood, I felt lighter, not empty, just unburdened. Back at home, I made dinner, lit a candle, played a record I hadn't listened to in years. Nat King Cole, his voice like velvet across the room. After I ate, I took my teacup to the window and sat with the evening again. There was no message waiting, no apology, no knocking at the door. And still, I felt full. The life I had now didn't need an audience. It didn't require permission. It was built on silence, on choosing, on the quiet power of not returning to the place that taught you how to disappear. I had found something better than acceptance. I had found myself, and I had offered her back everything she had been, denied time, attention, care, softness. My name was still Margaret. My age still 73. But I wasn't the same woman who stood in her kitchen holding a gold chain and a card that would never be given. That woman had waited to be invited. This one had already arrived. And as the sky dimmed to a deep indigo, and the wind stirred the curtains ever so slightly, I whispered something only I needed to hear. This time, decide who gets to call me anything else. The end.